Hello Arkham horror fans, Man from Lang here. FFG recently released their preview for Union and Disillusion, the fourth Mythos pack in the Circle Undone cycle. That's our topic today on The Whisper in Darkness. The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. That's right, on this episode we are taking a look at Union and Disillusion, the fourth Mythos pack in the Circle Undone cycle. I'm also testing out the shiny new webcam and lighting setup that I picked up over the holidays, so you'll be seeing a lot more of my horrific visage as the channel enters its third year. Union and Disillusion has investigators journey to yet another iconic Arkham location, the Unvisited Isle. The scenario also sees the return of some old favorites to the encounter deck, as well as new player cards, most of which focus on movement. There are spoilers throughout if you are concerned about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. The Unvisited Isle beckons, so let's get started. The Circle Undone cycle has already featured several iconic Arkham locations, including the Silver Twilight Lodge, the Witch House, and Hangman's Hill. I suspect investigators will be whisked away to another dimension before the cycle is through, but before that happens, there's at least one more stop on designer Matt Newman's maddening tour of Arkham, the Unvisited Isle. The Unvisited Isle is a location in the Arkham Horror board game. However, I wasn't able to find much information about it online. FFG's announcement is also relatively vague, stating that as the investigators approach the island, a pillar of spectral energy is visible in the distance. As the pillar rises into the clouds, a vortex of otherworldly mist spirals about it. Arkham unveiled a sourcebook for the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game by Chaosium. Contains a short entry about this small uninhabited island that is visible from the Garrison Street Bridge. According to the sourcebook, the Unvisited Isle is low, swampy, and covered in thick undergrowth. On its eastern tip, visible from the bridge, are a series of gray standing stones covered in green moss. An altar of a similar substance rests in the center of the small stones. The stones are said to be older than the Native Americans. Superstitious peasants occasionally claim to see Witch Keziah Mason and her familiar Brown Jenkin roam the island. A secret cult may also have ties to the place. The sourcebook goes into quite a bit of detail about this secret cult, an evil coven that has been secretly present in Arkham since the town's beginnings. The members take care not to associate except on coven business. The number of central members is always 13, although their actual number varies. The sourcebook identifies all 13 members, including William Danvers Johnston, Vice President of the Arkham National Bank, Abigail LaRue, a maid for the Neely family on West Miskatonic Avenue, and Ellen Wimple Smith, a sweet acting nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. The coven is still headed by Keziah Mason and the Black Man, an avatar of Nyarlathotep. All of the members have signed their names in the Book of Azathoth in the presence of the Black Man. The evil coven has no connection with a group of Miskatonic students accused of the ritual slayings of domestic animals on the island. The dogs and cats were obtained from the local pet shop and were allegedly killed in a bizarre fraternity initiation stunt. Charges are pending and the names of the accused were being withheld by the police. That story would make a great red herring for investigators when they arrive at the Unvisited Isle, although I highly doubt that it will appear in the scenario, since the story does appear in a Chaosium product. When the investigators reach the Unvisited Isle by boat, they will be confronted by horrors old and new. Whippoorwill, a bloody annoying encounter card that made its debut in the Dunwich Legacy Deluxe box, will make its triumphant return in Union and Disillusion. I'm not surprised this little bastard is back, since we already know this cycle features several cards such as Racked, that will subtract from an investigator's skill value. Encounter too many of these negative modifiers at once and you could find yourself caught once again in a whirlpool, unable to fight or escape. Whippoorwill is joined by another dangerous avian, the Spectral Raven. It has 2 fight, 2 health, 2 evade, and the creature and spectral traits. Its prey is the investigator with the lowest intellect, and it has the alert, hunter, and retaliate keywords, so attacking or evading the Raven is a risky proposition. Spectral Raven has the forced effect. After Spectral Raven engages you, you must either resolve each haunted ability at your location, or Spectral Raven gets +2 fight and +2 evade until the end of the investigation phase. The Spectral Raven will hit you for 1 damage and 1 horror. We've seen a few examples of haunted abilities on locations such as the master bedroom and spectral side of the abandoned chapel, so you'll probably want to avoid triggering them if at all possible. That means the Spectral Raven will likely have 4 fight and 4 evade most of the time. The Spectral Raven has only 2 health, so it's relatively easy to kill. The big question is whether we'll encounter flocks of these little peckers a la Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. 1 Spectral Raven is relatively easy to deal with. A swarm of them could be deadly, especially if they all trigger the same haunted ability as they descend on you. Speaking of locations with haunted abilities, FFG's preview article spoils Forbidding Shore. It's a 3-shroud location with 1 clue per investigator and the Woods trait. While you are at Forbidding Shore, you may take the circle action to test willpower or intellect 3 to find the brazier by the wooded trail. If you succeed, you may light or unlight the brazier. It also has the haunted ability. You must either lose 1 action or lose 2 resources. It is connected to 2 other locations. The preview article hints there are advantages and disadvantages to lighting or unlighting the brazier, which could make for some interesting choices during a blind playthrough. If Forbidding Shore's haunted ability triggers either as a result of something you did or an encounter card, you'll lose an action or 2 resources. I don't like the sound of either of those options, especially if the haunted ability is triggered repeatedly. Whether you lose an action or 2 resources depends a lot on when the haunted ability triggers. For example, if you draw the encounter card such as Shapes in the Mist during the Mythos phase, you'll have a choice. You may also have a choice if a Spectral Hound makes an attack of opportunity against you during your turn. If, on the other hand, a Spectral Raven engages you during the enemy phase, you'll probably have to lose the 2 resources, since you'll have no actions remaining to lose. I'll have to figure out some way to remember when haunted abilities trigger, because I am certainly bound to forget them during a blind playthrough. FFG's preview article spoils Agenda 1A and Act 1A of Union and Disillusion, but they don't give us much to go on. Like many of the agenda cards that we've seen so far, Agenda 1A, the Lover's 6, has a doom threshold of 8, which is fairly generous. Ancient Evils, it seems like a given in this sort of scenario, so that agenda may be flipping a lot sooner than you think. Act 1A, the Unvisited Isle, contains some flavor text, but no other information. You need 3 clues per investigator to advance, which is fairly typical of the scenarios we've seen so far this cycle. It's difficult to get a sense of the scenario based on the limited information in the article. Presumably, we're paying a visit to the Unvisited Isle to either investigate what is going on there or disrupt whatever is producing the pillar of spectral energy. The fact that we may light or unlight the brazier suggests the scenario may be objective-based. I'm thinking of scenarios such as the Unspeakable Oath or the City of Archives, which let investigators advance once they complete or don't complete a list of tasks. But that's just speculation on my part. Whatever is happening on the Unvisited Isle, I do not like the looks of this creepy fellow featured on the box art. The preview article spoils 4 player cards, 3 of which deal with movement. Warning Shot is a 2-cost Guardian event that has combat and agility skill icons and the tactic and trick traits. It has the game text as an additional cost to play Warning Shot. Spend 1 ammo from a firearm asset you control. Move all non-elite enemies at your location to a connecting location. This action does not provoke attacks of opportunity. This card is the perfect marriage of theme and mechanics. I love the idea of being able to use ammo tokens for something other than killing enemies, and Warning Shot is a wonderful way of capturing the idea of firing into the air to scare off a bunch of trash. I think this card is going to see play in a few Guardian decks because it addresses one of their weaknesses, and that being evasion. Guardians are great at killing enemies, but sometimes it's better to run than stand your ground and fight, especially if you're running low on ammo. Unfortunately, many Guardians come up short in the agility department, which makes it difficult to evade an enemy if necessary. If evading one enemy is difficult for a Guardian, evading multiple enemies is next to impossible unless they're packing cards from another class. Off-class Guardians such as Skids O'Toole and William York have it a little easier since they can play cards such as Elusive and Survival Instinct. Warning Shot fills that gap for a low agility Guardians. For a single ammo, you can move all non-elite enemies at your location to a connecting location, giving yourself some breathing room to plot your next move. You don't have to make a skill test to do it, which could be important during a cycle with a lot of negative skill modifiers floating around. You don't even have to be engaged with the enemies, which means that you can save other investigators at your location with this card as well. That has the potential to save your group a lot of actions. It's also worth noting that Warning Shot does not exhaust the enemies, so enemies with the Hunter keyword will give chase during the enemy phase. Obviously, you don't want to waste your precious lightning gun ammo on this. That's why you should always consider packing a 32 Colt. Warning Shot is a tactic, so you can stack it on Stick to the Plan before a scenario starts if you're really worried about being overwhelmed by enemies. Warning Shot also happens to be the first Guardian trick in Rita Young's playbook, although she doesn't really need it. Rita already has plenty of evasion options at her disposal, and besides, she needs to earn at least 3 experience points before she can afford a firearm, that being the old hunting rifle, in order to use it. All in all, I quite like Warning Shot. Ammo tokens can be a scarce resource depending on the firearm, but spending one of them to remove a bunch of enemies from a location is a really efficient use of your time. It will only scare away non-elite enemies, but they're the one that tend to run in packs anyway, so this is a very cool card. The second card spoiled in the article is Esoteric Atlas. It's a 3-cost Seeker asset that costs 1 experience point. It has an agility skill icon and the item and tome traits. It enters play with 4 secrets. As an action, you may spend 1 secret and exhaust Esoteric Atlas to choose a revealed location that is exactly 2 connections away from your location. Move to that location. Esoteric Atlas takes up a hand slot. Seekers already have several strong movement options at their disposal, so Esoteric Atlas has a pretty high bar to clear. Shortcut has been a staple since its release in the Dunwich Legacy. Besides being fast, Shortcut lets you move any investigator at your location to any connecting location. Shortcut 2, which was released in the Pallid Mask, can generate a tremendous amount of action advantage in solo or multiplayer if you drop it on a high traffic location. And then there's Pathfinder, which is an absolutely stunning card that was released in the Miskatonic Museum that lets you move to a connecting location for free during your turn as long as you're not engaged with any enemy, which I find is rarely an issue. Pathfinder is also non-unique, so you can have 2 on the table at once. If 1 Pathfinder is good, double Pathfinder can make your investigator feel like a god. Esoteric Atlas costs 1 experience point and 3 resources, just like Pathfinder, but that's where the similarities end. Esoteric Atlas enters play with 4 secrets, which means it is more limited than Pathfinder. You can work around that limitation by playing Esoteric Atlas in combination with cards such as Enraptured and Truth from Fiction from the Boundary Beyond, so that's not really a major concern. Unlike either Shortcut and Pathfinder, Esoteric Atlas requires an action. That's a big strike against it in my book. Speaking of books, Esoteric Atlas does have the tome trait, so Daisy Walker may trigger it with her additional action without taking a tempo hit. Esoteric Atlas is better in Daisy decks, although it's worth mentioning that Daisy can also play Pathfinder, saving her free action to trigger another tome such as Old Book of Lore. Finally, Esoteric Atlas is more restrictive than either Shortcut or Pathfinder, since your only option is to move to a revealed location exactly 2 connections away. Those are the 2 important words there, revealed location and 2 connections away. Both of those caveats make Esoteric Atlas less flexible than Pathfinder, but I can think of at least one situation where it will be helpful, and that is when you have to backtrack. There are many scenarios in the Arkham Horror LCG that require investigators to backtrack. Scenarios that immediately come to mind include extracurricular activity, Blood on the Altar, and Lost in Time and Space in the Dunwich Legacy. The Unspeakable Oath, A Phantom of Truth, and the Pallid Mask in the Path to Carcosa, and the Doom of Estley, and Heart of the Elders in the Forgotten Age. Backtracking can be a real pain since you usually encounter a bunch of enemies along the way that you need to either fight or evade. Those enemies aren't necessarily deadly, but they're just there to slow you down and prevent you from reaching your objective. Esoteric Atlas lets you bypass those enemies and keep on trucking. The Atlas also lets you bypass the abilities on the intervening location cards themselves. Lost in Time and Space, for example, includes several locations with nasty effects, as does the Doom of Estley. Bypassing those locations, as well as any enemies that happen to be on them, is a win-win for you. If you're playing a scenario that forces you to push forward relentlessly into the unknown, Esoteric Atlas isn't going to be much help. However, if you need to return to a certain location to complete a scenario, the Atlas will help you find your way back that much quicker. I mentioned at the beginning of this review that Shortcut and Pathfinder set the bar pretty high for movement-related cards in the Seeker class, and I don't think Esoteric Atlas quite clears that bar. I might consider playing the Atlas in Daisy because she can use her additional action to trigger it. Other investigators are going to have to spend their actions to do so, which is going to be a bit of a tempo hit. I might also consider it if I know I'm going to face a scenario that does require me to backtrack quite a bit. Otherwise, I will probably just stick with Shortcut and or Pathfinder. I think they are simply more versatile and useful in a wide range of situations. The third card spoiled in the preview is Decoy. It's a 2-cost rogue event with 2 agility skill icons and the favor and service traits. It has the game text Evade, automatically evade a non-elite enemy at your location. Response: when you play Deploy, increase its cost by 2, change a non-elite enemy to up to 2 non-elite enemies. Response: when you play Decoy, increase its cost by 2, change at your location to the at a location up to 2 connections away. Decoy does a bunch of things that are either rare or break new ground in the Arkham Horror LCG. First, it lets you evade any non-elite enemy at your location without requiring a skill test for 2 resources. While poring over the card pool for this video, I was surprised to discover this type of ability is still fairly rare. Cutting Distraction, a survivor event from the core set, lets you automatically evade all enemies at your location, but it does cost 5 resources. Stray Cat, a survivor asset also from the core set, lets you automatically evade an enemy, but you do need to discard the cat. Besides those 2 cards, there is Cheap Shot, a rogue event from A Phantom of Truth. It will let you evade an enemy that is not engaged with you, but only if you succeed by 2 or more on a combat skill test during a fight action against that enemy. Impromptu Barrier, a survivor event from Shattered Aeons, also lets you evade an enemy that is not engaged with you, but again, you need to pass an agility skill test during an evade action against another enemy. It's worth noting that all of the cards I've discussed let you evade elite and non-elite enemies. Decoy is limited to non-elite enemies, so it's not going to get you out of every jam. While Decoy's first ability is rare, its 2 responses break new ground. If memory serves, I don't believe that we've seen a card that lets you spend additional resources to trigger additional abilities. That's exciting because it does open up all sorts of design space to explore. Decoy's first response lets you spend 2 additional resources to change non-elite enemy to up to 2 non-elite enemies. If you spend 2 resources to trigger Decoy's second response, the enemy or enemies you evade may be at a location up to 2 connections away. We've never been able to evade an enemy at a different location before, which is pretty cool. The beauty of Decoy is that you may trigger both responses if you wish, spending a total of 6 resources to automatically evade up to 2 non-elite enemies at a location up to 2 connections away. If your rogue investigator gets cut off from the group somehow, you can still reach out and lock down a couple of enemies for your group for that turn. Now, spending 4 to 6 resources is quite expensive for the additional abilities, but there are rogues out there such as Preston Fairmont and Jenny Barnes who can afford to pay full cost for Decoy. I'm intrigued by this card. Automatically evading an enemy without having to make a skill test is a rare ability. Having the option to automatically evade 2 enemies or automatically evade an enemy at a location up to 2 connections away is almost unheard of. I can think of at least one scenario, the Devour below, where that sort of ability would come in extremely handy, and I'm sure that players will discover all sorts of others once the card becomes available. Decoy is the most expensive event in the game if you go all in on it, but there are a couple of rogues who will slap down 6 resources for this without blinking an eye. I anticipate that we're going to see more cards with this sort of template, which is an exciting prospect as we enter the new cycle. The final card spoiled in the preview is a Survivor asset. This is Guiding Spirit. It costs 1 resource and 1 experience point. It has a willpower skill icon and the ally and Geist traits. It has the game text, you get +1 intellect skill value. Non-direct horror must be assigned to Guiding Spirit before it can be assigned to your investigator card. Forced after Guiding Spirit is defeated by horror, exile it. Guiding Spirit has 3 sanity and it takes up the ally slot. Here's a cool little ally for survivors and off-class survivors. Guiding Spirit is certainly cheap at a single experience point and a single resource. It bumps up your intellect by 1, which is the best skill in the game. Skill boosts like this could be very important during the Circle Undone cycle, which features a lot of cards that do hit you for negative skill values. Guiding Spirit also comes with a sizable chunk of sanity. Guiding Spirit does have a couple of downsides in that you must assign non-direct horror to it before you can assign it to your investigator card, and if it's defeated by horror, you've got to exile it. If you want to benefit from Guiding Spirit's intellect bonus and sanity pool without having to purchase it scenario after scenario, you're going to have to find a way to protect it. Cherished Keepsake, a free survivor asset from Echoes of the Past, is a good place to start if you play the Keepsake in combination with Resourceful from the Path to Carcosa. You'll rarely, if ever, need to exile that Guiding Spirit. Otherwise, you can pay 3 experience points to pick up Charisma from the Essex County Express and play Guiding Spirit in combination with another ally, such as Peter Sylvester II from the Dunwich Legacy, who can soak horror before it comes anywhere near your investigator card. Now, it's important to mention that Guiding Spirit is non-unique, so you can have 2 of them in play with Charisma on the table. You'd need to take at least 4 horror before you'd lose one of them, and you do get that +2 intellect bonus to boot, which sounds like a pretty sweet deal to me. I quite like Guiding Spirit. Survivors aren't the most intellectual bunch of investigators, so the intellect boost is always welcome. They've also got a relatively easy way to protect the Guiding Spirit with Cherished Keepsake. Unlike many of the other exile cards, which tend to be one-shot events, Guiding Spirit will carry over from scenario to scenario as long as you don't assign that 3rd horror to it. If you do happen to exile Guiding Spirit, it's not the worst thing in the world, since it costs only 1 experience point. Besides, the exile cards become a lot more attractive to survivors toward the end of campaigns, when they usually have more experience than they know what to do with. That's going to do it for my preview of Union and Disillusion, the 4th Mythos pack in the Circle Undone cycle. I'm really looking forward to this Mythos pack. I am not looking forward to the return of the Whippoorwills, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. The Whippoorwills were a real thorn in my side during the Dunwich Legacy cycle, and things could get much, much worse during the Circle Undone with all of the negative modifiers floating around in the encounter deck. If you draw a card, a couple copies of Whippoorwills followed by a card like Racked, you could find yourself in a whole heap of trouble in a hurry. I'm also looking forward to the player cards in this Mythos pack. I think Warning Shot, Decoy, and Guiding Spirit are all very cool. Decoy has abilities on it that we simply haven't seen on player cards before, which is exciting because it creates all sorts of design space for designer Matt Newman to explore. Who knows, maybe we'll see a series of cards in this cycle with similar abilities to Decoy, allowing you to spend extra resources to get additional responses. I think Esoteric Atlas is probably the weakest card of the bunch, although I could see it playing it in a deck like Daisy Walker, who has that additional action. I could also see playing it in standalone mode if I know I'm going up against a scenario that requires me to backtrack. I'm not quite sure I'm ready to put it in a deck during a campaign, especially when I have options like Shortcut and Pathfinder at my disposal. All in all, I can't wait to see what else this Mythos pack has to offer, and its release can't come soon enough. That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed this preview, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.